So I want to welcome Christy Savellano, who's the intake specialist at Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, and Alyssa Phillips, who's the education attorney there. And she's also a former PILI intern from Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. And they're going to start our day by helping us with strategies on interviewing clients in the context of legal aid. So thank you, Christy and Alyssa.
Great. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today, 9:30 in the morning. So here we go. So we're going to do client interviewing techniques and best practices from the field. And my name is Christy Savellano. Pronouns are she, her, hers, as Brent said. So with that, this is just about, interviewing legal aid clients in order to increase levels of success in representing their needs. So a little bit about the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. It's an advocacy organization founded 41 years ago. In the Law Project, which we are a part of, there are 5 attorneys. And then we're actually hiring 1, and then we're going to have an equal justice attorney join us this summer. And then there's me, intake specialist, social worker, and also a full-time street outreach worker, and that is our Law Project. And it was founded in 1997, focused on the rights of homeless students. But as you can see, in the many years that it has started, it has grown. And also apologize if I'm like coughing and stuff, because I am a little sick. So, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa.
Thanks, Christy. And yes, thank you so much for having us. Like was said, my name is Alyssa, and I'm an education attorney at CCH, and I was a PILI intern. And my plug for PILI, I definitely have to say, I feel like it gave me such great opportunities and connections, which led me to where I am today. Interning with, through PILI connected me with CCH, which helped me get an Equal Justice Works Fellowship. So I highly recommend getting to know your other PILI peers and all the people connected, because I think it's a really great program and way to network. So I'll talk a little bit about our Youth Futures Mobile Legal Clinic. So one of the things about CCH that makes us unique is we have a model of bringing services where clients are. And so our Youth Futures Mobile Clinic was started with the idea of bringing civil legal services to unaccompanied homeless youth through outreach. So at shelters, at schools, and places where they are, so that the barrier of actually coming into our office would be removed. So we focus on public benefits, getting IDs, ceiling expungement, employment and housing, and other civil legal matters that might impact unaccompanied homeless youth. And then we also do some civil rights litigation, and we've done some around the Homeless Bill of Rights, as well as consent decrees with DCFS and Chicago Public Schools.
So during this presentation, we'll discuss settings of client interviews, the interview process, a little bit about racial equity, implicit bias, and trauma-informed care, and then go at the last, the confidentiality. So that's a little bit about like what the presentation will entail.
And our goal for today's presentation is to give you some tools on how to build trust as you start connecting with clients, establish some next steps, how to obtain relevant and important information, and creating a practice that incorporates the holistic perspective so that you can grow as a well-rounded attorney.
And then settings of a client interview. Alyssa, you can just move forward if you want. So common interview methods. Right now, we are still working remote. We've been working remote for over a year since COVID. So what we've been utilizing a lot is phone and video via Zoom when it comes to our intakes. And then as well as when hopefully we can go back this fall or early summer in person again, in the office and then on the streets and community settings. So those are the various settings that we do our intakes or interviews with clients. So with the first part, so the phone interviews, when you connect with a client, make sure you're establishing who you are and your role. So hi, my name is Christy Savellano. I'm the intake specialist here at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. How can I help you? And even if they call you, they may not fully comprehend what legal aid provider or what you provide. So just giving a summary of, what you assist with, such as, we assist with birth certificates, public benefits, educational rights, little things like that can go a long way in understanding, helping them understand what services you provide. And then ask whether they have time to answer questions, just because, it's for us, it's less than 20 minutes, but maybe they're picking up their kid or they're running errands or things like that. So making sure, asking right away, is this an okay time to do an intake? It's going to be, less than 15 minutes, but we want to make sure that you have time to answer our questions. And if not, you can just say, is there a better time to call you back? And then scheduling a follow-up if it's necessary. And usually when a client connects and calls you, they want to start giving the information right away, what's going on, or the issues that is coming up for them. So with that, it's really important to have, when you are establishing your role, and who you are. I think, like, for me, I have a couple of questions. I will make sure to get a summary of the challenges or the needs that you are letting me know, but is it okay to ask these questions first? So just redirecting and making sure that, sometimes it's really difficult because they can be like crying or just having a lot of emotions on the phone. So even taking just listening to them for a little bit, but then redirecting at some point is really good. And getting the basic information for us, the name, phone numbers, address, date of birth, things like that, that's internal for us, just regarding intake. So you can flip, Alyssa. So video interview, this is something that we have tried to connect with providers. So it's similar to other interviews, just because like with COVID, right, we haven't been to the office or doing outreach. So this is another way that we can do intakes, especially we connect with a lot of people experiencing homelessness in shelters or drop-in shelters where they do have computers and they have case managers there. So we usually meet with our clients via Zoom and work with the providers or case managers to set up this interview. And again, doing the same thing, establishing your role, who you are, what types of services you provide, and also letting them know that it's okay to turn off the video anytime, or this can just act like a phone call. So giving them those choices to make sure they're comfortable, and then make sure you have like a good internet connection, and be aware of the space that's quiet where no one else can hear. Confidentiality, right? Especially in work from home settings right now, like you might be sharing a space with your roommate or your partner. So making sure that, like for me, like I'm the only one working at home, so no one else is here. But if my partner was home, like I would be in another room with the door shut. So making sure that that's like really important, because it does build trust and rapport.
So I can talk a little bit about kind of in-office interviews, as the world kind of reopens up. So one thing I think that's really important is to always ensure the client can travel to the office. Making it clear that there are, other possibilities or ways to help the client get to the office if they can't. And, I think asking that up front before making plans is really important so the client doesn't feel bad. And And, also be aware of comfort levels with entering a corporate setting. So, if you're working at a legal aid that's maybe downtown in a really big high rise, maybe someone who's felt, they haven't had the best of interactions in those settings might feel uncomfortable, having to go up to someone who's a door person and asking, where to go. I know even in our building, we've had, some conversations about, making sure that people who, are allowed to come in, even if maybe they look like they shouldn't be, like, for some reason. Or if Christy said, if they come in with a lot of emotions, knowing where to direct them. And so I think also obtaining that information, figuring out if they're comfortable, if they've had a negative experience, walking them through what the process is in getting into your office. So if there is a door person, if they're going to have to call up, kind of what that looks like, giving them the awareness so they know what to expect. Travel to and from can be cost and time prohibitive, so understanding their schedule and being self-aware of your own flexibility too, of when, you can meet with them, what kind of supports your office can give, if they can give, travel vouchers, if they can give CTA cards. Ask questions about the unfamiliarity with the location. I know with us, a lot of our clients don't necessarily spend time downtown. In downtown Chicago, so they might not know. So making sure that, you are asking those questions, what their comfort level is, in any way that you can kind of assist them with that. Like I said, any barriers or access into the building, is your building wheelchair accessible? Is it accessible if someone has, some other impediment, and making sure that that before, so that your client is not put into an uncomfortable situation. Understanding who's coming with you. And I know this is a little different during COVID, but they might not have the availability for childcare. So understanding kind of who's coming with them. Do they need to bring their children? Are they bringing someone else into this interview or meeting? Do you have space for that? And then setting out a time frame is really important at the beginning. So if you know that you have 30 minutes for this interview, tell the client that. If you have an hour, tell the client that. I think this is helpful both for them and that expectation setting and, giving them kind of a guideline of what's going to be happening. But I think it's also for you as well as an attorney, so that you can kind of keep yourself on track. And obviously things happen and meetings go longer, but I think having that up front helps you kind of direct the conversation and provide some clarity. So I know with us, we've kind of mentioned this, sometimes we do meet with clients on the streets. When I was actually a Philly intern, we were doing a lot of work with a tent encampment over in Uptown. And so myself and my attorney supervisor at the time, we would meet with clients under the viaducts around Wilson and Lawrence. And so, this was something that was necessary in order to meet the clients. And so, I think the first thing is always understanding if you're entering a client space, which this definitely was, these were tent encampments where clients lived and stayed. And so, having that understanding, similarly to if you were to enter someone's house, how you would treat it. So, making sure you kind of gauge the client's level of comfort. Are they comfortable with you going to meet them on the street? Are they aware of kind of, what that might entail that other people might overhear? Laying that kind of out in front of them, always making sure it's a good time to talk. This is really important for showing respect and sets up the conversation. So I think, as attorneys, a lot of times, right, we're dealing with deadlines and we want to get things done, when it works for our schedule, because we, are under a lot of pressure and have these deadlines. But if you try to communicate with your client at a time when, they are stressed or busy or dealing with something else or just not in a place to talk, it's not going to be productive. So I think always making sure, always rechecking, is this a good time to talk? And then exclude others when necessary in order to ensure confidentiality and create a respectful space. So I think, kind of figuring that out. If they are bringing a partner or they're bringing someone else into this meeting for their comfort level, you know, making sure that they're aware that, you know, what that means if that other person hears. And then also, you know, if there are spaces and times when it's not appropriate for them to have that person or it's not in their best interest, communicating that and saying, you know, really for this particular part, you know, I think we should have a conversation just one-on-one, and kind of explaining why. And then you can always suggest relocating or scheduling a follow-up interview in the office. So when we would talk to folks in the tent encampments, we would typically kind of do the introduction, but then we would schedule a meeting, you know, at a coffee shop usually that was nearby, that provided maybe a little more, you know, kind of separation from where they were staying, or in the office, and we would give them CTA cards. So that's another good way to go about that. And then community settings. So one thing that we do at CCH is we set up these legal clinics that I mentioned at schools, at shelters, or drop-in programs, coffee shops, fast food places, public libraries. So these can be a really good alternative if getting to the office doesn't work, or if you have, you know, one thing that we do a lot of is birth certificates. We help people access birth certificates. So if you're going into a, you know, we connect with the school and we find out that there's, you know, 15 kids who need help with this, sometimes it makes sense to go to the school and do those kind of all, you know, at once so everyone can come in. So figuring out kind of what the need is, a community setting can be really helpful. Obviously, this is kind of pre-COVID. It might not be a while post-COVID when this is really, you know, something that works. But just a couple things to be aware of. If you are meeting with a client at a coffee place or fast food place, it's always good to be prepared to buy food or drinks. And so, you know, asking your workplace about, you know, is that, you know, something that they're going to cover? Is that something that's okay to do? And this can be a good way to kind of also make the client feel comfortable, and can be a good kind of start to it, especially if they have little kids. And just always make sure that you're explaining to them, you know, that some of these locations lack privacy. So, you know, you should always try to make yourself be able to communicate with someone in a place that is protected by confidentiality, that is private, but obviously circumstances happen, but just always making sure you're communicating that to the client in a clear and understandable way.
So starting the interview, so if they speak another language, familiarize yourself with resources and policies your agency has for translation services. And with this, we actually just got a new translation services that Alyssa put together, and just regarding protocols, you know, like who, if someone speaks Spanish or another language, you know, to refer that client to that specific attorney or staff. If not, you have the translation service, the number, and what that looks like for next steps. So if the client is struggling with with responding, asking whether they prefer other language. So would you prefer to continue in the language that they're comfortable with? So telling them that you can use a translator if available, so asking your agency just regarding what that looks like, or schedule a time and interview with a staff that speaks the same language as the client. And if they use a family member or as a friend to translate, be careful about confidentiality. We've had this happen where like a child would translate for a parent, and not necessarily that's like a lot of burden on the child, and also just like just understanding like that's a lot for the child to you know, translate. So making sure that having like space and capacity for translation services, that's really important, and like taking that burden off of the person who is translating, especially if it's another family member or a friend, and especially like if, you know, something happens and a confidentiality is breached, what does that look like for you? So making sure that, you know, that's important to think about if a client speaks another language. So When you start an interview, obviously, again, like you introduce yourself, your name, position, the firm you're representing or the legal aid that you're a part of, ask them their name, and also ask preferred names and gender pronouns. That's just, something out of respect and inclusivity, and just no assumptions. A lot of the clients that we work with are in different spaces, such as LGBT youth that we work with. So it's really important, to not assume. And just because even we get birth certificates for folks and that might not be the name that they're comfortable with, that's so important to just normalize it at the start, and also do your research and not just slap on your pronouns. That's a really important thing to really understand what that means for the population, and what it means for you to be an ally. So that's a little bit about starting the interview.
And we will too, sometimes I know it can be a good way to always just include your pronouns first as well. So we try to do that at CCH, always saying my name is Alyssa, my pronouns are she, hers, and that kind of creates that space as well. And then in terms of when you're dealing with names, we'll sometimes say the name on your birth certificate, if it is different than the one they prefer, or their dead name, or what's your, name given at birth, or your legal name, but kind of giving it its caveat to know if we need to use that name for legal purposes, we're understanding and seeing that that is not the name you prefer. So it kind of goes into its own category. So when you start the interview, the client, that the information they share with you will remain confidential. And you need to explain what this means in the context of a legal interview. So I know for me, I work a lot in education, and a lot of parents get really nervous to, share information if their child has been missing school, because they're afraid it's going to trigger DCFS involvement. And I think there's lots of different fears that people have, especially when you're talking about kind of the legal field. So really taking time, even if it seems, second nature to you to know what confidentiality means in the legal realm, it doesn't to other people. So making sure you're really explaining, this means I cannot share this information, right? I can't share this with other organizations. I can only share information when you give me explicit consent to do so, or in order to represent you. So, explain that. And I think something that's also really important is encouraging your clients to ask relevant questions at any time. I think a lot of people, I'll at least speak for the clients we work with, they don't have great experiences with the legal, field. And so, they might have a lot of hesitancies. So really make sure you're giving that space, that they know they can ask questions, that they are not expected to understand everything, and that it's okay to take time to re-explain things. And, I think saying that a couple times, leaving a couple spaces to make sure that they really can ask questions that they want to, and creating that space for a dialogue or conversation and not an interrogation. I think especially when you're dealing with sensitive matters, this is really important. And when you're asking those questions, always putting the caveat that this, we're asking this in order to kind of represent you, and exactly why, explaining that to them, right? So for me, if I, a lot of my cases are trying to get children re-enrolled into school. So sometimes I need to know about their living situation, if they're staying at a shelter, in order to kind of start that process. But so I always explain, here is the law. If I need to demonstrate kind of what your living space is in order to enroll your student in this program that's going to help them access school. So take the time to go through those steps so they understand and don't feel like it's an interrogation. So you want to get basic information necessary for follow-up. This is so important, especially in light of COVID, when so many things are virtual. Making sure you're getting the name, the phone number, the address, the date of birth, and getting, if you can, also asking, you know, are there other phone numbers that you're comfortable with? If we can't reach this number, what's the, you know, other best place to get you? And balance this with not immediately asking for sensitive personal information like social security numbers and income. You know, kind of think through starting that introduction, like Christy said, introducing yourself, and then explaining to why this basic information is necessary, and thinking about what you need it for. So like I said, we get a lot of birth certificates for people. And like on our intake form, it might ask for a social security number. We don't necessarily need that to get a birth certificate, right? But we definitely need the name and the address and the date of birth and a phone number to like re-engage with them. So also kind of thinking through, knowing what do I need for this next step in getting that information, but thinking through, you know, wanting to make sure they feel comfortable. So throughout the interview, be sure to use clear and simple language. I know when we, as attorneys, we're surrounded by kind of these big legal phrases, but I think before the interview, take the time to do the prep. Know how to explain these things to someone who didn't go to law school. And I think that requires kind of some extra prep that is so necessary, because it's also for you. I think if you understand things in a more robust way, it's going to help you be a better advocate. Ask open-ended questions. So let the client provide the narrative, and ask follow-up and clarifying questions when you need more information. I think sometimes clients, you know, as attorneys, we might kind of know what we're looking for, right? Those certain like trigger words that help our cases, but clients might not know that. And they might not know something that's really important to share that we think is important. So thinking about those open-ended questions is going to help you, you know, garner more information, and then you kind of funnel down. But I think starting with those open-ended questions lets the client share, and it also helps you figure out what's actually most important to the client, because they're going to share with you the things that kind of matter the most to them. Understand that some clients may be seeking help from various sources, including other legal aid providers, friends, and family caseworkers, aldermen. So ask those questions. Figure out, you know, like, have you, obviously, you know, we might ask the question of like, have you sought other legal aid support? But kind of asking who they've talked to about this, you know, what supports do they have? And I actually think that's a really great question in an interview that I've seen Christy ask, is getting an understanding of what their kind of support system looks like, because that's going to help you as you move forward with the case, knowing kind of what those look like for them, and making sure several forms of contact information you get. So, you know, we, like Christy said, we work a lot with caseworkers, and that helps us connect with a lot of youth. And so we always ask youth who their caseworker is, what their, you know, do we have permission to speak with them, what that looks like. So figuring that out, is there someone you can connect with about their case that, you know, they are comfortable, if that's kind of the best way, especially if they are staying at a, you know, more communal living situation. So what happens if a client gives more information than necessary? So this is pretty common. You know, a lot of times we're storytellers, right? We want to tell our stories. And I think, especially for clients who have been going through so much, you know, sometimes you have clients who don't want to share very much, but often you have ones who want to tell you everything that's going on because they're upset or they're angry because something horrible happened to them and they want someone else to know about that. So I think what's really important, always know your timing. How long do you have for this interview? Do you have time to, you know, listen? Are you running really short? And always starting up front when you're kind of doing those intros with explaining how long this interview is going to be and how much time you have. Ask questions as a way to redirect the interview. So an example is, I understand that there are a lot of details you want me to know. Can you tell me this? Because I want to focus on this specific information to help better understand. And this kind of goes to the prep, making sure you're really prepped before this interview so you know what are kind of my goals. I want to come out of the interview with this information. so that you can kind of redirect those questions. And I think, you know, kind of like always checking in with the client too, because I think sometimes they might share information because they don't totally understand the question that you're asking, or what information they need to be giving you. So double check again, like restate your question again, making sure that it's clear kind of what information you want. Attempt to understand what factors prevent this comprehension. So is it, you know, the language you're using? Is it speed? Is it setting? And get as much information as possible and be very concrete with follow-up. I think one thing too that's important is letting clients know too, like they might be jumping ahead in their, you know, story or the information you need. So always telling them like, we're going to have a follow-up. This isn't, you know, our last conversation most of the time. So for this conversation, you know, this is what I'm trying to get, but so that they know that you're hearing them. So I think a lot of clients, a lot of people feel like they just have not been heard, especially by professionals. So making sure, you know, you can direct that conversation, you can set concrete timelines and that follow-up, but creating that space where they know that they, you know, are being heard, that you want to, you know, hear the information they have to share.
And then motivational interviewing is a big part of like how we create our interview process and just the theory behind how we ask questions. So motivational interviewing is a counseling method that we use. And this approach focuses on having a client-centered approach, and my background's in social work. So this is like a really important thing to implement when it comes to interviewing and connecting with clients. And it sets the stage for fostering clients' desire to change. And also, how does this connect to client intake? So having this base and foundation and connecting with clients in the interviews. Within motivational interviewing, there are skills called ORs you can develop to connect with clients. So always like open-ended questions, asking those, affirming, right, strengths-based, like thank you for, you know, sharing with me, because sometimes like when a client comes to you, they are just really, you know, very negative that like no one can help them, or like they like it's just like very hard. So even finding the littlest thing to compliment and just like appreciating that that they came to you is really important. So having that like affirmations, and then also just reflective, the R is for reflective listening. So, you know, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide, and then just summarizing the statements. So making sure that you are on the same page with the client, just like at the end of the interview, I'm like, this is like the summary, and then I kind of give a summary of what they've said to me. Did I miss anything? And making sure that, you know, they're comfortable with you sharing to your team or whatever like the next step looks like after the intake process. Just because at the coalition, I do either email or at a case meeting, we connect with cases and making sure that the client, these are their words, and this is what they're going through, and making sure that, you know, you're summarizing those things. And then the next slide, Alyssa, thank you. And then when it comes to just active listening, just the biggest thing is listen and don't judge. It's really important to have this skill, making them feel as though you have heard every word and being fully there and attentive and very present. And just understanding and internalizing what the clients are saying to be a good advocate, right? And when it comes to this, just building a good rapport and trust, that they know that you are there listening to them, because many of my clients, they come in and usually no one calls them back, or they don't hear anybody on the phone, or, you know, they've been referred to so many different places that even when you talk to them, that's like a really big thing. So, you know, being present with them and demonstrating concern and paraphrasing to show understanding, as I've said before. And also like a biggest thing with active listening, right, is nonverbal cues. And like what I learned in social work school is like sometimes like, I don't know if you've had to do this in like law school, but like when you are like doing like a like seeing yourself in a mirror type thing, or like kind of doing like exercises with somebody and like kind of like, you know, giving feedback on like how you hear something or like how you are connecting with clients in that way, just so you are you know, like making sure that you're like nodding, having eye contact and leaning forward and things like that when it comes to nonverbal cues. And then also just the verbal affirmations, you know, I see, I know, thank you, I understand, just so they like know that you are there with them. And then the last thing on here is just treat clients with unconditional positive regard. And that just means, you know, basic acceptance and support of a person, regardless of what the person has said or done. And this is just like a client-centered approach. So there are other theories out there just to strengthen your client interviewing skills. But this is something that we utilize at CCH as one of the foundations we use during client intake, as one of the theories. So, okay.
Okay, so, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about like the beginning of interviews, which is super important, setting it up. But the conclusion is also really important for productive representation. So first thing, and I'm sure you guys have all heard this a lot in law school, but manage expectations. It's so important for the well-being of your client as well for yourself. You know, explaining to the client what you can and can't do, how long it will take, and be sure to explain the process as clearly as possible. Like Christy just said, a lot of times clients come into, you know, your office already, you know, have being transferred to different legal aids or, you know, not being able to get people on the phone, and their issue has probably been around for a while, whatever they're coming to you with. And so, you know, like anyone, they want usually a quick answer. They want, you know, they want relief. And so explaining to them, you know, what really can be done and what can't, and if it's going to take a while. And, you know, I think setting that stage up front is going to help with the rest of the experience. And then continuing to update those expectations as you continue to meet with them. So if things change, letting them know so that they feel like you care about, you know, the process with them, that you're there with them through it. Establish when they'll hear from you again and any information or action you need from the client. So I know with us, we have some clients who, you know, they call a couple times a day because they're anxious. You know, if you are waiting for your SSI benefits and you really need that money, of course, you're going to be really anxious about it and you want to know when it's going to come in. So, you know, I think one thing I always try to say at the end of them is I say, you know, I will call you if I'm saying, you know, you'll hear from me by Friday. And if you haven't heard from me, you know, send me an email. Like I kind of give set the stage of like I'm going to contact you by them, but if for some reason I haven't, you contact me. But trying really hard to be intentional about actually following through when you say that. I know one thing Christy does super well that I would highly recommend is, you know, we use Google Outlook, and we use the Google Outlook calendar. So when Christy has to call someone, she puts it on her calendar for that day, right? Like I need to call this person by Friday, and then it's on her calendar. And that's a really great technique, I think, to remind yourself, especially when you have multiple clients or multiple things, of being like, you need to check in or follow up or do something. Just put it in your calendar, you know, as soon as you get off the phone with the person, so it's in there. And then we've said this again, but I just like can't emphasize enough how important it is always getting alternative contact information. You know, people's phones get lost or they break, or, you know, their plans change, their phone numbers. So getting that email, phone numbers, case managers, families, friends you can contact with is going to help you be able to stay in communication. Especially, you know, like I gave the SSI example. With SSI cases, you go through periods of time where you don't necessarily have to connect with the client because you're just waiting for an answer. And so, you know, it might be good for those longer type cases where you're not in constant communication with the client to have multiple forms in case something changes. Ask for personal information at the end of the interview after you've kind of built trust, and always explain why it's needed. So, you need this information so you can follow up when you hear from, the Illinois Department of Health about the SSI case. Being as detailed as you can about why you need something or why you're asking something is really helpful to the client, right? Because this is what they're going through, right? It's their life, it's their case, it's their issue. And so making sure you kind of provide that information so they kind of know what is happening.
So when it comes to racial equity, like this is literally just like surface level, very quick. And obviously like this can be a whole presentation in itself, and also with the other things that we've mentioned, right? So just wanted to just uplift that at Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, we are working on racial equity, and we have a CCH racial equity committee internally to really figure out and how to break those systems and internally, right, to be more racial equitable. So when it comes to our definition of racial equity at CCH, it's race does not predict life outcomes, example, educational, economic, social, political success, where privilege and oppression are no longer correlated to race. And decision-making power and resources shift to members of non-dominant culture or class. And how does this framework connect to our work with clients? And one, I just want to start with data. In this past calendar year, more than 80% of our clients are people of color or Black, Indigenous people of color. So, and with that, and if you know, people experiencing homelessness are disproportionately BIPOC. So sure, and understanding, especially even in other legal aid or nonprofits, understanding and then learning and shifting powers and resources to support our clients. And this starts with us in our practice. And again, this is very surface level. Just wanted to introduce a little bit and highlight racial equity within our PowerPoint. And with that, you can go to the next slide, Alyssa. This is something that one of our attorneys who is a professor at Loyola, she does this with her class. So we just wanted to share a little bit about, racial equity is a big hot topic right now. And like, where do I start? What does this look like? And I think like the first thing is, we wanted to introduce it just very like, this is one thing that you can do on your own time after this, to just kind of start, building that practice for yourself. So just wanted to just highlight implicit bias. So what is implicit bias? Stereotypes that impact our understanding of others, affecting our actions in an unconscious way. A preference of a group, positive or negative, often operates outside of our awareness. So a lot of this is unconscious and based on stereotypes and attitudes we hold that tend to develop earlier in life and tend to strengthen over time. And this can really affect like how you connect and work with your clients, right? So this is something that we really wanted to uplift. So you can go on the next slide, Alyssa. So expressions of implicit bias towards individuals. So, standing further away, making less eye contact, harsher judgment on facial expression, shorter conversations and less speaking time, and affects our own interactions as interviewers, right? Being awkward, less effective, misunderstanding and resistant to asking questions, and less likely to inspire trust, and impedes our ability of the whole story. So this is like a little bit about just like very basic implicit bias work. So the next slide is the implicit association test. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's free. And you can, it's like 30 minutes long to complete. And first, like take the race implicit association test, and then choose another one, because there's other ones just when it comes to intersectionality, like gender, disability, different things like that. You can see like what your biases are and to understand like how you impact like your clients. This can be a first step to really understanding yourself and being aware and naming those biases that you hold to be a better advocate. So you can go to the next. And these are just some reflection questions that I put up there. So after, if you wanted to take this, you can kind of ask yourself, how did you feel? What connections can you make? What is one strategy you can use to help you mitigate negative outcomes that may flow from your biases, to really understand yourself, to be a better attorney, right, and a better advocate for your clients. This is just, again, very surface level, and one thing that you can do after this to, educate yourself when it comes to racial equity and what that looks like. And then centering racial equity in law, understanding and unlearning about implicit bias is just the start. Like, you can start from even reading or just like connecting with your community and what that looks like, and just also naming and understanding history and how your profession or organization perpetuates its connection to white supremacy and racism. And really understanding, like, you can't really, one thing that I really learned during this work is, like, if you don't name something that's an issue, you can't solve the problem, right? So really understanding what this looks like for CCH, for example, we've been a white-led organization for 40 years, and we've only been doing racial equity work for 4 years. So it's a lot of unlearning and restructuring these systems who hold white supremacy and racism, right? So it's like a lot. And again, like as I said, this is very surface level. So Alyssa, you can go to the next bullet, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So one thing too, I think as, new attorneys, and that is really important, I think especially for white attorneys, is to commit to unlearning and taking actions to dismantle these systems that continue to maintain white supremacy and racism, and shifting power and centering for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And making sure that we understand that, this isn't something that should be a burden on our peers of color or on our colleagues of color, but is something that we need to take time to learn and, study in all the information that is already out there. And, I think when you are an attorney, we are not taught to kind of embrace like the humility, because I think, we have to carry ourselves with a lot of confidence in order to do our work. But I think, racial equity is so important to actually being able to provide forms of justice to our clients. And I think you have to, especially as a white attorney, you have to commit to humbling yourself to be able to do that. And I, like Christy said, this isn't something that happens quickly or something that is like easy, especially when, it's been for so long. But I think taking those steps is really important to representing your clients well. And it comes at all levels of our practice. So not just in our work with our clients, but with our other peers, with our colleagues as well. And I think, this work is lifelong and it's continuous in all aspects. And I think, when you're starting your career, really taking time and intentionality to study the racial history of the legal field, because I think if you don't, like Christy said, if you don't name those things, you're going to continue to perpetuate it. And so I think, taking that time is really, really important to it.
Thank you, Alyssa. And then these are also our recommended resources as well, just like this from Yale Law, an essay, and then other resources just as a start. So we'll share this PowerPoint so you can click on the links. So trauma-informed care, again, this is like another thing that we really center our work around at the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. And this can be another PowerPoint. So I really love this quote. You don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. So you can go on the next slide, Alyssa. So when interviewing a client with trauma, when working with BIPOC and vulnerable populations, you will encounter clients who have experienced various types of trauma. So again, like we really recommend getting additional training on trauma-informed interviewing. There's like a lot of really good ones. Alyssa, do you want to plug that one that we did? I think it was with Sarah Hess, right?
Yeah, so we had Sarah Hess, who's an attorney at Legal Counsel for Health Justice. And yeah, I think it was really important to kind of have that understanding of how much trauma impacts your ability to access legal supports. And I'll plug this too. I know this might be unique to our organization, but like Christy said, right, she's a social worker. And it's been like invaluable to think of, you know, Christy's covered under our confidentiality in the law project, but, you know, being able to talk to Christy about best ways to engage with clients who have experienced trauma or who, you know, it was going to be a difficult interview because of the things they've gone through has been so helpful. Because, you know, as attorneys, we're not trained for that in a way that a social worker is. So thinking through to what your organization might look like, because it is really impactful and helpful to both not re-traumatizing your client, but also to you getting a successful result when you kind of have a trauma-informed lens.
Alyssa. And then tips on handling trauma. So if a client discusses a traumatic situation with you, show appreciation and willingness to share. You know, thank you for sharing with me. I know it can be difficult to talk about those things. And also too, like if there is something that's triggering them, like it's okay to pause the interview and just be like, okay, like, you know, we can cancel for the day or we can stop right here and pick up, like making sure that they have like the choice and control when it comes to the interview. And then also it's really important to hold space for the client and have a strength-based approach when working with a client. So that's like a very big, broad word, but I think like again, like client-centered. So, you know, pausing when they need to, affirming them for sharing with you. And again, like these are some of just the biggest things that it has really helped me when working with clients who experience trauma. But again, like it's really important to really take a look at your department and also like just your organization and how to handle, just because like I think like even at the coalition or other legal aid, a lot of our clients have experienced trauma, and it's really important to know and understand what that looks like and also how to approach it. Because like if you're also holding on to trauma yourself, like how do you process it within you if it's triggering you, and then also helping a client. So like making sure that it's like not harming them if you can't handle the situation. And I guess like what Alyssa was saying, having a social worker within your practice is really important. And I'm always like advocating for that, right? Having like my goal is to have like a social worker per attorney so they can work together. And that's been really helpful just because of like, not necessarily attorneys are trained in this space. So it makes an organization a little bit more trauma informed.
So we've kind of mentioned this before, but I think it's something that's really important because it will definitely come up sometime in your legal career, is interviewing clients when they're upset. So, you know, sometimes trauma results in anger, and a client may express anger towards you. I can almost guarantee as an attorney, this is going to happen to you. And so, you know, people who are seeking legal assistance feel a sense that they've been wronged, right? or their rights have been violated. You don't seek I remember one of my professors used to say, right, you don't seek an attorney on your best day most of the time, right? You're seeking an attorney when you're not in a great situation. And so they are probably coming into you in a sense of being fatigued, emotionally fatigued or physically fatigued, of being, feeling like they have been wronged, feeling scared. And your questions might be difficult for the client to answer, right? In the legal field, we want details and documents, right? We want to know dates and times and the actual words that were said, because that's, can be important to your case. And oftentimes, with trauma, their client might not remember all those things, right? They might not remember those specific details. And so it might be really hard for them to answer questions, and they might get frustrated with you even asking those questions. Or even if you do your best to, be non-judgmental and neutral, they might still feel like they're being interrogated because of their past experience with people in the legal profession. And then, unfortunately, the way the laws is, sometimes you're unable to help, right? Or what they want, you may not get. And so that they may feel powerless. I know with me, I work a lot with families who feel like they have been wronged by the school system. And, oftentimes we can get a good result, but sometimes they also want, they want the school to admit that they did something wrong, right? They want some type of damages for what they've gone through. And sometimes that's possible, but sometimes it's not. And that can make them feel very upset and powerless. So, let's see. When this happens, it's important for you to stay calm and to not take it personally. So obviously that can be very hard, especially as a young attorney. It's really intimidating when someone is mad at you, right? And when they're angry, and they might, raise their voice, and it might seem intimidating. So I think, you staying calm, realizing it's not about you, trying to empathize and seek guidance, right, from agency staff if needed, especially as a young attorney. If you don't know how to handle something, that's okay. I know in school, we're not taught to say like, I don't know, or I need help. We, are supposed to make it seem like we know all the answers to the test. But when you're practicing law, I think one of the best things you can do is know when you need to go to someone and be like, I don't know how to handle this. And, I think too, it's helpful, especially, if a client tends to get upset more frequently. We definitely have clients, who have a lot of emotions, and you kind of know this is going to happen. So prepare yourself, right? Let other people know in the office you're going to be interviewing this client, and it might be a difficult conversation. And I know that's something I would sometimes go to Christy about when I knew a particular client was someone who was going to get upset with me because, of what they have gone through. And so kind of prep yourself, right? How can I make sure that, the space we're at is calming? I've noticed, and this was something that we did pre-COVID, but Christy kind of helped me make my office trauma informed, right? So that it doesn't look like a DCFS office or a medical office, right? That it looked like a calming place. So trying to make your space calm to kind of help the client, and also setting this up. So part of the reason I think we spent time talking about setting expectations is that that's super important to help prevent a client from getting upset. Setting those expectations so they kind of know what to expect. So always refocus the client back to the questions. So if they are getting really upset, you can say and name that, like, I see that this is upsetting. For these reasons, these are why I'm asking the questions. If they need a moment, if they need a break, giving them that moment, ask the person if they need a few minutes. And then usually if you remain calm and neutral, they're going to calm down too. It's kind of part of like the human interaction. So as much as you can to remain neutral, don't raise your voice or argue with them. Don't join the rant. That's not going to help you get the information you need. Remain calm, have, be kind of goal focused, know what you need to get. And asking them too, right? Like Christy said, if this interview needs to be paused, if it's not going to be productive, having that understanding as well.
So this is just like a poem that I really like, just in connection to self-care and work when doing this work. We're running out of time, so we're just going to speed it up. If you wanted to read it, you can at your own time. So next slide, Alyssa. So I just wanted to plug this book. It's called Trauma Stewardship. It's an everyday guide for caring for self while caring for others. Again, like understanding that like you're bearing witness, which is a concept that there is inherent value in bearing witness to injustice and trying to help even if you can't solve the problem. And I think like for me, when I get a call and I can't help, like I think like at the end of the day, like understanding that like you were there to pick up that phone and even walking through the client, and sometimes that's enough, and making sure you're understanding your boundaries. And when it comes to self-care practice, like a lot of people go shopping and baths and things like that. And I think like for me, it's like, how can you do your self-care like when you are stressed, right? And like knowing your own boundaries and limits, that's a part of self-care. Taking days off, putting your phone away, even taking time like 30 minutes to not eat and work. And also like I am very like when it comes to therapy, like I'm a very proponent of it. Like if you're a social worker, you should go to therapy just because it's a lot to process and just but self-care can look different for everybody. But when doing this work, I think like especially like understanding the importance of your boundaries and your limits is so important so you don't get burnt out. And I know this and I'm sure Alyssa knows this as well. So these are some of the things I could talk about it for hours, but we have time. So Alyssa can talk about rules of confidentiality real quick or summarize, and then we can close it off.
Yeah, so I know we're over, so I'll go really fast. The confidentiality is so important, as I'm sure this was, told to you in law school. But I think really understanding, taking time to actually read the rules of professional responsibility, understanding what it is super crucial. Obviously, a lawyer shall not reveal information relating to the representation of a client unless the client gives informed consent. The disclosure is implied authorized in order to carry out representation. Always make sure you explain confidentiality to your clients. Always make sure you're getting their consent, preferably always in writing before anything gets shared or done, and who you can share that with. Always make reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of information. The rule of client-lawyer confidentiality applies in situations other than those where evidence is sought from the lawyer through compulsion of law. So, for example, the confidentiality rule applies not only to matters communicated in confidence by the client, but also to all information relating to the representation. And a lawyer may not disclose such information except as authorized or required by the rules of professional conduct. Again, make sure you know them. Make sure you know the policies of your organization. I know we have a form in our law office every time we are talking to other people that we have, our clients sign that says we're allowed to disclose information to whatever the entity is. So finding out exactly what that looks like at your organization is super crucial.
And that's it. So thank you so much, everybody, for just being listening and being here. I know it took a little bit longer, so if you have any questions, if not, feel free to email us. That's like our stuff, and then you can follow us. We have an associate board as well, so if you wanted to, I know law school is busy, so maybe after, if you wanted to join, there's that information. So thank you so much, Brent, for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you both. That was a really great presentation, a really great summary, a foundation of a lot of the skills that our interns and fellows will need this summer. So thank you, everyone. Give us a silent, muted, virtual round of applause for Christy and Alyssa. Thank you both.